Hello, I'm here with my son Wesley. Say hi, Wesley. You say hi?
Hi.
Hey, and we are going to talk to you about Daniel, which can be considered an Old Testament apocalypse. Apocalypse is simply a word that means unveiling or revelation. So the New Testament book of Revelation is sometimes referred to as the Apocalypse, the unveiling. So we're going to see some of the similarities between these two books as we go forward. So let's dive in. All right, first story we want to focus on is from chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Yeah, what do you see there?
Oh, there.
Yeah, you see that statue? So you may be familiar with this story. If not, I commend to you a read of Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he wants his wise men to try to interpret it for him. They cannot. He is unwilling to tell them what the dream was. Oh, Gesundheit. And he is smart enough not to tell them the dream. He tells them that if they can really tell him, the divine meaning behind it, that they should be able to tell him what his dream was. Of course, they can't do that. And in a rage, he is going to have all of the wise men in his kingdom executed, which would include Daniel, our hero, and his 3 friends. They beg for time. They spend the night praying and fasting, and God reveals the dream and its interpretation to Daniel, and he goes and takes it to Nebuchadnezzar. So in this dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees the statue, and the statue has a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet that are part iron, part clay, so part strong and part brittle. You'll notice that the worth, you might say, of the metal kind of descends as time goes on, right? We start with gold, the most precious, and then silver, then bronze, then iron, which is strong, but you're not going to make a lot of money selling iron. People don't make coins out of iron. And then feet of iron and clay. And these represent different kingdoms. We'll have more to say about that as we go on, but the head of gold represents the kingdom of Babylon, which will be conquered by the silver, which represents the kingdom. Oh, we had a little kicking of the computer there. Kingdom of Persia. The kingdom of Persia will fall to some guy named Alexander, who we consider to be rather great, which is Greece. And then the Greek Empire, after Alexander, was divided and eventually fell to Rome. And the legs and the feet of iron and clay both refer to Rome, which had such a long reign that it eventually grew weaker. But at the end of the dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees something else, which really is what disturbs him in the first place. He sees this rock, this divine rock. He says it's not man-made. It comes from heavens. It's like an asteroid meteor. And it smashes the feet of the statue. The whole statue tumbles and basically disintegrates, is blown away. Yeah, poof, just like that. And the mountain, or the stone, then grows into a mountain that fills the entire world. Okay, so let's talk about that. Daniel, after mentioning these kingdoms, he concludes his explanation by saying, Nebuchadnezzar, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. So it will be utterly unlike the kingdoms that made up the statue. Gesundheit, which, as powerful as they are, passed on and on and on. Oh, you okay there, Wesley? But this kingdom will never be destroyed, nor left to somebody else. It will smash all the human kingdoms of the world, bring them to an end, and stand forever. And guess what? If we were to go into the beginning of the Roman Empire, somewhere around the year 4 BC, Jesus Christ is born in a little backwater province of the Roman Empire in the Promised Land. And so God did begin to set up his kingdom at that time. But again, more to say on that as we go forward. Okay, the second vision we're going to look at is from Daniel chapter 7. And this one is actually not Nebuchadnezzar having a dream, but is Daniel himself. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of what he sees. This is from Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 2. Daniel talking. So I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So you see those kind of artistically depicted here, these four winds, stirring up the sea. So when we think of the sea, we might think of holiday by the beach, seems pretty nice. When the Hebrews thought of the sea, they thought of chaos. That's where the sea monsters lived. Maybe a pop culture reference for us would be Godzilla emerges from the sea, right? The sea is where danger is. The sea is the place of chaos. When God creates everything, right? When the earth was formless and void, there was the chaos of the sea, and God spoke order into that. Or, to go to the other end of the Bible, in Revelation 21, in the vision of the new creation, one of the things that John notes is that there is no sea. I think symbolizing that there's no chaos, there's no source of scary monsters to come out. So if Daniel's seeing this, he's not excited, he's kind of apprehensive. And four great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. So he's got good reason to be, right? The first, actually, before we read on, just wanted to make that point. And I'm going to show you another picture of what this might look like on the next slide, and we'll describe the beasts. Okay, continuing on. So from verse 3, four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. All right, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. That's this guy right here. And as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Well, interestingly enough, if we look at the different aspects of this beast, lion and eagle, those are both symbols for the ancient Babylonian Empire. So just like in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the first thing he sees, the head of gold of the statue, stands for Babylon. This lion is Babylon. It's the mind of a man giving to it. That may have reference to the story in Daniel chapter 4 where Nebuchadnezzar goes crazy for a time and then God restores his sanity, or may have reference to something else. Okay, but behold, another beast, a second one, was like a bear. Okay, so that's this next one. And it came out of the water, was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Arise, devour much flesh." Okay, well, the empire that comes after Babylon, just like in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, is Persia. This bear is higher on one side. Persia was really the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medes and the Persians were 2 different groups of people. But the Persians came to dominate, and they're the ones we remember. So that may be what's going on with the bear. One side is higher than the other. Devouring 3 ribs, there were 3 major kingdoms that the Persians defeated. The Babylonians, the Lydians, and the Egyptians. And so that may be what that references. But anyway, they're like a bear, so they're the next one. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now this one I find really interesting. So the leopard's got 4 heads. It's also got wings, which leopards and wings are both symbolize speed and swiftness. This is the kingdom of Greece, who under Alexander, the Greeks conquered most of the quote-unquote known world at that time in like less than 2 decades. It was remarkable how quickly Alexander's conquest he got all the way from Greece to the borders of India, and he died in his early 30s. And he'd conquered all that by the time he died. What happened when he died? Well, if you know your history, his kingdom was divided into 4 pieces amongst his top 4 generals. Look at the heads, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what happened to the Greek Empire. It got split into 4. So a remarkable prophecy here. Daniel is seeing this ahead of time. Okay, so that's the Greeks. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong. Okay, so this is a new bigger, badder than the ones before, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth making great boasts. So after Greece, we know, comes the Empire of Rome. All you need to know for here is terrifying monster. Rome, in terms of its power and its length and how long it lasted, was unlike anything that part of the world had ever seen. So terrifying monster, destroying all in its path. Okay, so same 4 kingdoms as Nebuchadnezzar saw, but a little bit more vivid and more terrifying. Okay, but remember the end of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. There's a rock that smashes the statue. Well, how does this dream end? Well, stay tuned. But before we do, here's a quick summary here. If we look at the vision of Nebuchadnezzar and the vision of Daniel, we see the same 4 kingdoms represented: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And Daniel's predicting this before it happened. Many modern non-believing scholars look at this and say that Daniel must have been written after the fact, because there's no way he could have predicted this. However, once we accept the fact that there is a God and that he is perfectly capable of foretelling future events before they happen and revealing those to his prophets, there's no issue with that at all. And I've given you their dates down here below in case you're interested in that. All right, back to the vision. So just like the statue was not the end of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the beasts are not the end of Daniel's dream. So he goes on, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. That's a very Hebraic expression, the Ancient of Days, meaning the oldest one, the most ancient, the person who was before everything else, took his seat. And just look at this description here. His clothing is white as snow, symbolizing purity, right? Cleanliness. His hair was like pure wool, same idea. His throne was fiery flames. Maybe that reminds us of Ezekiel's chariot, especially when we read that its wheels were burning fire. So this seems like God's war chariot, right? God, the oldest one, the most ancient, is sitting on this throne. He's majestic. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000. That's like ancient Hebrew for a bazillions of angelic beings. He's got a great army. The court sat in judgment, and books were opened. And I looked, and the beast was killed, its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So just like the statue was smashed by the kingdom of God, here the Ancient of Days comes, and even the great terrifying beast stands no chance and is destroyed before the power of God. So once again symbolizing that God's kingdom is going to outlast any kingdom of man, no matter how big, bad it may seem. Okay, here we come to the key part of the vision. So if you miss everything else, don't miss this. So next verse, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. If that phrase sounds familiar, Jesus is the one who uses that phrase to refer to himself more than anything else. He, over and over again, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son of Man will this, the Son of Man will that. He's thinking of this passage. This is the place where that phrase is used most vividly. But let's look at what happens to the Son of Man. He comes to the Ancient of Days and presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. He's being described as God, right? He's given dominion and glory. Everyone serves him. His kingdom lasts forever and cannot be destroyed. It is God's kingdom. And look, too, how interesting it is that the Son of Man is also described as a human figure who is distinct from the Ancient of Days. We have hints of the fact that God is not just one person. He's not Unitarian. He's Trinitarian. Trinity, Trinitarian. There's a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit, even though the Spirit doesn't necessarily show up explicitly in this passage. Look at some of this other language too. Given dominion, all peoples, nations, languages, everlasting dominion, everlasting kingdom. Think of who that reminds you of, and then stay tuned as we unpack that on the next slide. All right, so what is true about this Son of Man from Daniel 7? This is the crux and climax of the lesson. He's given dominion and glory to conquer. That's very similar to what Genesis 3:15 said. The seed of the woman, the offspring of the woman, will crush the great enemy of God's people, the serpent. And that's what happens here, right? The great dreadful beast, the one that's terrifying Daniel, is slain. And is slain before the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. All the nations and people serve him. Remember the promise to Abraham, your offspring will bless all the nations of the world, all the families will be blessed through him. And he's got an everlasting kingdom. Well, God made a promise to David, right? David, your offspring will reign forever. And so the promises to Adam and Eve, promise to Abraham, and the promise to David are all wrapped up in this one figure, this offspring, or to use this passage's phrase, the Son of Man, who's going to do all of those things. This passage just screams Jesus. This is who he is. This is what he's come to do. And Daniel sees this in advance, some 600 years almost before Christ shows up on the scene in human flesh. So that's pretty cool. So big takeaways from this. One, God's kingdom will outlast any human kingdom, whether that's an evil kingdom, a good kingdom, whatever it may be, right? God's kingdom will outlast the United States of America, as powerful as we may seem or we may feel. Right? God's kingdom will outlast any human kingdom. And God has set up his kingdom under the Son of Man, the great King Jesus, who is currently reigning in the heavenly places. And there is no enemy that can ever threaten his rule. And if we are his people, there's no enemy that can ultimately threaten us either. Anyhow, that's the book of Daniel. One final thing that I'll leave you with. This is optional, not even extra credit, but I think it's pretty interesting. If you go forward to Revelation, last book of the Bible, chapter 13, John sees a vision of this beast that comes, and notice how he describes the beast, and then go back to Daniel 7 and compare. It's very fascinating how similar these visions are. But anyhow, I'll leave you with that. Happy reading. And that's the end of this one.